Coming out sometime later this year, Nintendo Switch owners will have the chance to play one of the biggest and most critically acclaimed games of this generation. The Witcher 3, or The Switcher, if you want to call this port that, is a huge game, coming in a complete edition that bundles together the main game with the 2 expansion packs that came out a year later. And this has all somehow been squished down to fit on a handheld device that's quite a bit less powerful than the PlayStation 4 and Xbox One. From our early hands-on time, it manages to be a surprisingly well-rounded port. However, you can see exactly where those graphical cuts and compromises have been made. In the background, you're seeing some B-roll provided to us by CD Projekt Red, seeming to come from the console running it in docked TV mode because it was handed over to us in 1080p. In this situation, the game is limited to running the graphics engine at up to 720p, CD Projekt Red have already confirmed. Meanwhile, our actual hands-on time with the game was in handheld mode, where 540p is the maximum resolution, and of course then it scales up and down depending on what the game actually needs to do to try and hit a 30 FPS target. Even with that in mind, the game can look surprisingly good when dealing with close-up models and facial animations, but as soon as you look a few meters into the distance, you can see the first step down in the level of detail, and again a few meters after that. Grass and foliage in general is quite noticeably thicker and blotchier as opposed to the finer lines and detail that are present on other systems, and indeed within some of the rendered cutscenes. Grass also fades into view, sprouting out of the ground well within the middle distance as you canter along a road or path on horseback, and though trees and bushes fare quite a bit better, you do still notice the detail popping into them as you get closer. Shadowing, ambient occlusion and other post-processing effects have also been dialed back down or perhaps even turned off, it seems. In general, playing the game in handheld mode, it's clearly not a native 720p and it feels very soft through being upscaled to fit the screen. One thing that does really help is that while the game's graphics are lower resolution and dynamic at that, the UI itself is at 720p, adding a layer of crisp detail on top of proceedings. But the game does feel good, and that's much more important than the graphics. The game performs at 30 FPS with only a handful of noticeable drops in our experience. Even venturing into some of the notorious performance hotspots from the other versions of the game, it manages to play really well on Nintendo Switch. While there's going to be comparisons made to other ports that have graced the Switch, and the fuzziness of The Witcher 3 on Switch is indeed comparable to Doom and Wolfenstein 2, it feels much better than those ports. The key difference? Well, The Witcher 3 was always a 30 FPS game, while Doom and Wolfenstein 2 both started at 60 FPS on other consoles and had to trade in this key pillar of a slick and fast-paced id shooter on the way to the Switch. That hasn't happened with The Witcher, and as an action-adventure, open-world RPG kind of game, this is much better suited to 30 FPS gaming. The port has been handled by Saber Interactive, last seen throwing thousands of zombies at you in World War Z, and another quite astonishing fact is that they're squeezing the game down to fit entirely on a 32GB cartridge for physical purchases, with no additional downloads as we've seen with some other games. In essence, they've been able to cut out all of the bits that aren't needed, so none of the high quality textures and models, and audio and pre-rendered cutscenes have also been able to be compressed further than on other consoles. And with that in mind, there's very few surprises to be had here. None, in fact. There's no amiibo support, there's no added homages to Mario or The Legend of Zelda, there's no motion control even for aiming ranged attacks. This is quite purely The Witcher 3 nipped and tucked to fit onto the hybrid console. Of course, we'll have to wait until the full game is released sometime later this year before we can make definitive impressions about its performance, but from this showing it feels like a comprehensive and assured port. If you're thinking of playing it on TV, then you're most likely going to want to pick up the cheaper, prettier and already available versions of the game, and honestly, given the acclaim that it's received, I don't know what you're waiting for. But you can't take those versions with you on the go, and as a handheld game, this is a showcase of the kinds of grand games that the Switch can still deliver despite its mobile-oriented hardware. This could be almost without compare on the console. That's all for this video, thanks for checking it out and I hope that you found it useful and informative. If you have done so, then please consider liking, subscribing and even sharing this with others. Hopefully we will see you again soon. Goodbye!
It must suffice.